To enable your Angular application to be able to work with a server, we need to set up a server first. So far, we haven't learned enough about how you would configure a server side. That we are going to examine in the last course of this specialization, which is fully dedicated to using Node and doing server-side support. At this moment, we still need a server. So let's set up a very simple server. Fortunately for us, there is a Node module called as json server. We're going to make use of the json server to set up a very simple server. What this server does is it serves up JSON data that you store in a simple JSON text file. In addition, it provides some simple support for delivering static resources that you can put in a folder, and then the server will serve up the static resources. So we're going to make use of these features of this simple server called the JSON server to help us to build a very simple server-side support that we're going to leverage for the rest of the exercises in this module. So how do we go about setting up the JSON server? Let's go through that next. As I mentioned, the JSON server is a Node module. So let's first install this Node module. We're going to install this as a global Node module. So to do that, we would type at the command prompt npm install json-server and -g. Now, if you are doing this on an OS X or Linux machine, make sure to use sudo. So let me go ahead and install this. So I'll type in sudo npm install json server -g, and then go ahead and complete the installation. Once the installation is complete, my JSON server is ready for use. The next step is to go to a convenient location on your computer and then create a folder named JSON server. Now, in my case, I am creating it in the folder right next to my confusion folder. So let me go ahead and create a new folder there and then name it as JSON server. It doesn't really matter where you set this up. I just want to keep my stuff in one single location. So right next to my confusion application folder, I'm also installing the JSON server folder there. Now, after you do that, go into the JSON server folder, and then you will download this file named db.json that we provided for you on the course site. Now, you will find a link to that in the instructions of your exercise. Download the db.json file and then put it into this folder. Now you see that I have downloaded the db.json file into this folder. Now I have pre-configured this file with some JSON data, which my server is going to serve up. Now we're going to look at what is contained in the db.json file by actually starting up the server and then accessing the server and then letting it serve up the JSON data for us. If you are curious, you can open that file using any text editor and then look inside to see what is contained in there. You wouldn't be surprised because what I have done is basically moved my dishes information, my leadership information, and my promotions information that I was having in my services.js file. I have moved all that in here by converting it into JSON format. Now, the way we configured that in services.js was as a JavaScript object. Now, what is contained in db.json is the JSON version of it. So it is converted into JSON format and then stored in here. Be my guest. Go ahead and open the file and then have a look at it. I would use the other route. I will start the server and then use that to browse what is contained inside this file. Next, navigate to the JSON server folder that you just created. So I'm going to move down to that folder. So moving to that folder. So right now my terminal is in the JSON server folder, and then I can list and see that the db.json file exists there. To start up your server, at the command prompt, type json-server --watch db.json and then hit the return. Now, the JSON server is now up and running, and you would see it printing out some information on the screen as you see here. The interesting thing about this is that now you can use a browser and then go to those locations that are indicated there and then see what it serves up. So take some time to type in those into your browser's address bar and then see what it serves up. Let me show you what you will see if you use the localhost :3000/dishes. Now in this case, the 3000 that is specified after the colon is the port number at which you are accessing. The localhost means that the server is running on the same machine that you are currently on, and so you will be able to access that using that. If you need to access a server that is on a different location, you need to specify the name of the server. Now in this case, because your server is running on your own machine, you can just address it by saying localhost. This is an easy way of accessing a server. When we come to the server course, then we will see how we can access a distant server, which is accessed across the internet. Going to any browser's address bar, if I type in that value and then hit the return, you would notice that depending on the browser that you use, the information may be displayed in different ways. Now here I have installed some extensions to my Chrome browser, which allows me to format the JSON data coming in and display it in a format that is more easy for me to read. If you are using a standard browser, you might see the output in a somewhat different format, but you will still see the JSON data being displayed like this. So don't be surprised. This looks very familiar to you, right? This is similar to the JavaScript object that you were using in services.js, except now this is in JSON format, not the JavaScript object format. What this is telling us is that now we can go to a server and then pull down this data from the server and then use that within our application in order to render the menu items. Now, if somebody goes and changes this data on the server side, no problem. We can just pull down the data from the server side and then refresh our page. Similarly, take some time to browse the remaining links that are provided there and see what kind of JSON data they return. Now, the JSON server will serve up any static web content that you put into a folder named public inside the JSON server folder that you just created. And that static data can be accessed by typing in http://localhost:3000 into your browser's address bar. Now we're going to leverage that to show you how the distribution folders that you created using either Grunt or Gulp can be simply put on a server, and then it'll start serving up your web application from the server side. To do that, let's go back to our application that we had developed earlier and then fix up our Gulp file so that it will build the distribution folder correctly. Opening our Confusion application in a text editor, let's go to gulpfile.js. Now in the Gulp file, we're going to fix up the useMin task. In the useMin task, we were using menu.html before. Now that we have an index.html file, we're going to make use of that instead because we have configured the information in the index.html file instead of the menu.html file. The menu.html file has been converted into an Angular template already. So I'm going to update the useMin task. Instead of using the menu.html for the gulp source, I'm going to replace that with this. So here I am specifying that take all the HTML files in the app folder. And then in the process, it'll also be looking at the index.html file, and then it finds the configuration for the useMin in the index.html file. The fact that we are using those build statements, comments in the index.html file, that is what useMin will use to reconfigure our application. So that's the first modification that you would want to do to the gulp file. The second modification that you should be doing is to go to the browser sync. In the browser sync, we had this index as menu.html. Now that we have index.html, we might as well use that as the index file there. So with these changes, save your gulp file. Now your gulp file will be able to build your distribution folder for your completed third assignment and then generate the distribution folder. Switching back to the terminal. Now, if you want to stop the JSON server, you only need to type Control-C in the window and then stop the JSON server. Now that this terminal is in that location, I'm going to leave it there, and then I'm going to open yet another terminal, which I will use to navigate to my confusion folder. So let me open another terminal window. And then in this terminal window, I will go to my confusion folder. And in my confusion folder, I just updated the gulp file. So I can type in gulp, and then it should prepare my distribution folder correctly. Once gulp finishes its task, you should see the distribution folder already built in there. So you would have a folder named dist there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to copy the entire contents of the distribution folder into a folder named public in my JSON server folder. Now going to the JSON server folder, let me go into the JSON server folder and then create a new folder here and then name it public and then move into that folder. Now you're going to take all the contents of the distribution folder that you just created in the confusion folder, go into the distribution folder and then copy all the files over into this public folder. So now going to the distribution folder, I'm just going to select all the contents of the distribution folder, copy, and then move it to the public folder. So going to the public folder in my JSON server folder, I'm going to paste all the contents that I just copied from the distribution folder. So at the end of this step, you should see this as the content in your public folder. Now that you have completed the step, you should be able to go to your browser and then type in http://localhost:3000, and you should see your application being served up from there. Next, switch to the terminal where you were in the JSON server folder and then restart the JSON server. So type JSON server watch db.json and then hit the return. Now your server is again up and running. Anytime you want to stop the server, just type Control-C on the in the terminal window, and that'll stop the server. So now that my server is running, let me go to a browser window and then type in localhost :3000 into the browser's address bar. So going to a browser window, let me type in http://localhost: 3000. Now you see that your web application is being served up by JSON server here. So you would see all the information just like before, and then you will be able to navigate to any of the other pages, similarly to the menu, and be able to access the menu. And contact information. So now you see that you have already set up a web server that serves up the web page that you created within your exercise. This completes this exercise. In this exercise, you have learned how to configure a simple server using the JSON server npm module. This server serves up JSON data. In addition, the server also serves up static web content that you put into a public folder underneath the folder in which you started your server.